Coming up on Great Lakes Now, fighting wildfires with centuries-old practices.
The sap of pine trees is similar in chemical composition to gasoline, so they burn explosively.
Why rainfall is getting more intense. And the story of snowmobiles then and now.
Over a period of 2 years, he came up with the world's first snowmobile, and everybody thought he was crazy, and they told him so.
This program was brought to you by the Fred and Barbara Earp Family Foundation, the Charles Stewart Mott Foundation, Richard C. Devereaux Foundation for Energy and Environmental Programs at Detroit PBS, Polk Family Fund, DTE Foundation, and contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Anna Seisling. Welcome to Great Lakes Now. While it can seem like wildfires are something that happens out west, the Great Lakes region also has a history of devastating conflagrations. But an old method of managing the land might help us reduce the danger in the future.
The chaparral, like you have in Southern California, and coniferous boreal forests are like the two most flammable things on the planet. In the boreal forest, you have really big, high-intensity fires. I mean, the sap of pine trees is similar in chemical composition to gasoline, so they burn explosively. You can't get within a few hundred feet of a high-intensity fire without being killed by the radiant heat.
Wildfires became a real threat when new arrivals began taming the land.
During the European settlement period, settlers were clearing huge swaths of the landscape, clear cutting, trying to convert it to farms. And they used the lumber to build their buildings and left the slash, all the branches and stuff, scattered across the landscape.
In the autumn of 1871, drought conditions led to fires across much of the Great Lakes region. The Great Chicago Fire is the most famous, but a deadlier blaze hit the small town of Peshtigo, Wisconsin.
In the Peshtigo fire, some people went in troughs with water for horses and they ended up boiling. Some people went in wells and they suffocated. The only people who survived were the ones who went in the mill pond. Even they had to dunk under the water about once a minute or their hair would dry out and start on fire, because there was only a couple inches right on the surface of the water with clear oxygen and a normal air temperature, and above that is orange plasma. That's 1,000 degrees.
All in all, the fires burned more than 3 million acres and killed thousands.
Fire watchers everywhere are alert for the first curl of smoke that spells forest fire.
When the Forest Service was formed, you had to put out every fire by 10 a.m. the next morning. So it was total suppression.
We are learning how to better protect our forest lands and how to fight back when fires do break out. As soon as a fire is reported, fleets of specially designed vehicles move into the trouble area with everything from shovels to chemicals.
But total suppression revealed new problems.
In the late 70s, ecologists started doing research and discovered that you needed fires. Some forests were fire dependent. That fire kept pests at bay, it reset succession, it released nutrients, it did a lot of things. And they started doing natural prescribed fire where if lightning struck deep in the wilderness, you would let it burn. And then in areas that weren't wilderness, actually doing prescribed fires to try to restore the natural disturbance regime. So that's the late 70s through now. Now we're wondering what's going to happen with a warmer climate, and we start getting gigantic fires that we can't suppress. We're having unprecedented heat waves now. And as long as we have dense forests, which is the fuel, we're going to start having really big fires. We could expect a 600% increase in the frequency of large fires in Minnesota, northern Wisconsin, and upper Michigan.
We've designed all our infrastructure and we manage our natural resources with this mindset that once upon a time we lived in a static environment. But now the pace of change is running away from us. The climate's changed in the past, but the pace of change we're living through is just absolutely remarkable. The surrendering of the water vapor from the surface below is going up. It's going up at such an accelerated pace, decade by decade, that as we get into the late summer and the early autumn season, we can suddenly get into drought. American meteorologists use this more and more now, flash drought, where instead of gradually working your way into a drought, it's like you go into a drought within weeks. I think we're going to see more frequent episodes like this, and unfortunately, they're likely to happen in landscapes where it's going to dramatically increase the fire danger. And that's very, very worrisome, yeah.
More fires, hotter fires, more out of control fires. They are burning hotter. The fuels that are there, when this dries out, it's all fuel.
The Ojibwe have long recognized the importance of fire in forest management.
Buju and Dinawe Maganindudug, Anina Kinawea. My colonial name is Vern Northrup. I'm a retired wildland firefighter, operations specialist. We had to use fire in our past, in our history, and we've used it for thousands of years to shape our environment. I lived in both worlds. You know, I lived on the science side of fire, and I lived on the traditional side of fire. I think that gave me a greater understanding of what cultural needs we have to satisfy to bring that world back to us. Back in the early 90s when I started, you know, we wanted to do more active burning on the reservation. And we are very fortunate here with our council that they gifted us that permission. They told us at the time, you have 1 year to educate the people on the reservation and don't make us take your matches away. They allowed us back then to start burning. We're healing the earth by doing this. Now I noticed there's more interest in using traditional ecological knowledge to reach that.
What we can learn from indigenous forest management is a better job of maintaining biodiversity. We can learn a lot about fire management, how to respond to natural disturbances of all sorts.
It gave us everything we needed. Food, shelter, water, medicines, everything. We have to take care of it. If we don't, you know, we're going to lose it.
Data from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, analyzed by the nonprofit Climate Central, shows that since 1970, many U.S. cities have experienced increased hourly rainfall intensity, with much of the Great Lakes region being in the most affected areas. Stephen Shaw is a professor at the State University of New York's College of Environmental Science and Forestry, and he joins me now. Professor, what's driving this trend of increasing rainfall intensity?
So the primary cause is basically the ability of the atmosphere to hold more moisture. So we often talk about relative humidity. So if temperature goes up, we basically have an increased ability to hold moisture in the atmosphere. So on a day, maybe it's 30 or 40 degrees out, you basically have a sort of a limit to how much moisture you can have. And we don't really talk too much about how much humidity is there when it's 30 or 40 out. But when it's 70 or 80 or 90 degrees, we often think about the humidity. So the same thing's happening here as we experience climate change. As we have more days with higher temperature, we basically have more capacity to hold more moisture. If you have more moisture in the atmosphere on the day when there is rain, you can have more condensation and you have more rainfall.
So it seems like there's a direct link between an overall warming and the potential for heavy rain events. How much warming have we seen already?
Well, in terms of the last 50 years or so, we've seen around 1 degree C, so that's around 2 degrees Fahrenheit. So in terms of this increase in moisture holding capacity, it's around 7 to 8% per degree increase Celsius. So in this terms of this 1 degree Celsius increase, we have about already a 7 or 8% increase in moisture holding capacity and consequently an increase in precipitation intensity.
According to the data, on the heaviest 1% of days, rainfall in the upper Midwest and Northeast rose by 45 and 60% respectively between 1958 and 2021, so more than other parts of the country. This is U.S. data, but it seems likely that Southern Ontario has seen a similar increase. So with rain falling faster, what are the anticipated impacts on flood risks in the Great Lakes region? Are certain areas more vulnerable than others?
Well, the one thing with flood risk is it also depends on what we refer to as antecedent conditions. So basically, how wet is the soil before that rainfall occurs? So in some cases, if you have sort of natural systems, say a forested system, if you have drier soils or your soil wetness hasn't increased that much, just having increased rainfall intensity might not change flood risk that much. The place where you probably see the most impact is more urban areas. So you have what we refer to as impervious surface, so pavement and concrete, roofs, things like that. So basically you have a direct connection between rainfall intensity and the amount of runoff that you generate. So oftentimes if you look at the record of sort of changes in basically magnitude of stream flows, you don't really see that strong a change or increase in the magnitude of stream or river flows in the Northeast and in the Midwest for the most part. But what we tend to see more often is basically increased flooding in urban areas. And that's a direct connection to increased rainfall intensity.
Right. So with many cities in the region having experienced this increased rainfall intensity, even as their sewer infrastructure ages, how equipped are these systems to handle an increase in heavy rainfall events?
Well, I think there's some recognition among water resource engineers that systems are often under-designed, but especially in older cities or just pretty much any cities in the Northeast and Midwest, you have infrastructure that was designed maybe 50 years ago or 100 years ago using rainfall events at the time. Even up basically until now, we're often using historical rainfall to sort of predict what future rainfall might be. So oftentimes these systems are under-designed for what rainfall might be now, but especially 50 years in the future or longer.
The numbers we have describe how rainfall intensity has increased in the past. So is this a trend we should expect to continue to see into the future? And do we know what we're facing?
Yeah, this is one of these things. There's certain aspects of climate change. We're very certain that temperatures will change. When we talk about how overall precipitation patterns might change, say sort of annual rainfall amounts, that's something we have less certainty about. But when we talk about rainfall intensity, because it's so closely tied to temperature, we have pretty high certainty with that. So right now we're not anticipating, it depends on amount of greenhouse gases emitted by humans on Earth. But if we kind of stay on the track we're on now, we anticipate about a 3 degrees Celsius increase in temperature by 2100. So that would be somewhere around a 20 to 25% increase in rainfall intensity. And that's pretty reliable science in terms of that estimate.
What can individuals and communities do to adapt to these increased rainfall and flooding events?
Well, besides continue to think about how to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, the other thing is just to sort of be aware of potential like green infrastructure projects. As infrastructure is modified and updated, right? Most communities probably every 25 to 30 to 40 years are changing infrastructure in the community. Is to think about can critical infrastructure be resized at that time? So one thing I always sort of say to people is, it seems like if every pipe under every roadway had to be changed, that maybe seems like too much, and most communities can afford that. But I think an important thing is decide like where are your critical areas. So if you have an intersection or a bridge that goes to your local hospital, maybe that's the place you prioritize. If you have roadways that already flood, we talk about sort of no regret approaches. If you already have existing flooding, fix that, and that'll put you in good shape for the future.
Professor Stephen Shaw of the State University of New York's College of Environmental Science and Forestry, thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
Our region has produced plenty of inventions, some of which have given rise to whole industries, and this is the story of one of them. From Wisconsin's North Woods, filmmaker Nate Shepard contributed this story.
My name is Jonna Elison. I am the granddaughter of Carl Elison, the inventor of the modern snowmobile. Carl Elison was born with a club foot, which means he couldn't snowshoe and he couldn't ski, and he needed to get around in the woods in the wintertime. All of his friends could go out hunting and fishing, but he couldn't go with them because he had this deformity. In 1924, Carl moved here to Sainer, Wisconsin, and bought this hardware store. And what he did was he decided to make himself a machine that would take him on the same trails that his friends would go for their hunting and trapping and fishing. So he took parts that he had in his hardware store. He took the engine of an outboard motor and a Model T radiator and made a toboggan out of snow skis and endless track out of wooden canvas. And over a period of 2 years, he came up with the world's first snowmobile, which was the 1924 Elison motor toboggan. And everybody thought he was crazy, and they told him so. But when he finally put it on the snow and they saw how well it actually worked, all of his friends wanted one, because now they were the last ones out on the trap line or to wherever they had to go hunting. So he started building them here in his shop. And they were so popular, he ended up getting a patent in 1927. He started building what he could for his friends. He had to make refinements and use different parts and different engines and things like that. Maybe 3 of them he ever made were the same. And he did this until 1940, when he got an offer from the government to supply Finland with 200 machines. And he couldn't build that many machines in the back of his store. So he got a hold of Four Wheel Drive Corporation, and they agreed to take over the manufacture. And from then on, he was the major consultant. He turned over his patents, and they produced the Elison motor toboggan from 1940 until 1963. And that was the very beginning of the machines that we see today. It's quite a history, and we're very proud of it here. Sainer, we have the oldest trails around. As you can imagine, from 1924, we've had tracks on the snow before anybody else did. We had a snowmobile club form in 1967 called the Sainer Barnstormers, and it was a bunch of our people that got together and they decided to make a network. And they made this network of trails that went to the businesses, went to homes, all with permission of the property owners. And as the time went on, they made this beautiful trail system that is mostly wilderness trails, beautiful wilderness trails, and they're kept immaculately by the Barnstormer Snowmobile Club. Carl died in 1979, the day after Christmas, and he lived right next to me, so I knew him very, very well. And at the time, he was not a famous man, and he used to come up here to work every day, and he'd sit in his office, and the snowmobile trail goes right past his window, and he'd watch the snowmobiles go by, and he wouldn't say a word. It was a wonderful thing to see because you could tell his mind was working. If he saw the amount of snowmobiles today, he would just be blown away. But one of the things that bothered him most was accidents or deaths, especially the preventable deaths, because every single one of them, he felt that he was in some way responsible for that happening because of what he built. And even though it's an operator error, it still hurt him greatly, just like one of his family had passed away. So he was very, very intent on safety. So we don't want anybody to get hurt, injured, and certainly not killed on a snowmobile because of something that could be prevented. Watching your speed, staying on the right-hand side of the trail, and not drinking while driving. Those are about the 3 biggest things that cause the accidents and cause deaths for snowmobilers. So there's some downside to it, but there's a lot of good, and he would be extremely pleased to see the people having fun and the families that are involved and the friends that are involved and how it's helped our communities and our state and surrounding areas, and the immense amount of lives snowmobiles have saved in rescue missions. They've been on expeditions throughout the world, Antarctica, the North Pole, and some of the communities that live in the North Pole, they live on snowmobiles now. So it's added a lot to the culture of many, many peoples worldwide. Years ago, before the snowmobile was invented, there was really no tourism here in the winter. But since snowmobiling has taken on, people just love to get out there and get on the trails. And it also helps our summer tourism too, because we're a 4-season place here in Sainer. 4 seasons of beautiful activities that anybody can do. So it's great to live here year-round. Well, I've had a lot of perfect days on the trails. For me, and what I would recommend anybody to do is to start early in the morning, because the barnstormers are out grooming the trails all night long. Get together with your friends and get out there and stop anywhere you want, because you can take a beautiful photograph anywhere you stop. And the fellowship is great because there's always more snowmobilers that you can sit and talk to, and so many people make friends, and riding is great, but the fellowship is as good or even better.
To this day, for many people in the Great Lakes region, winter means hitting the snowmobile trails. But demand for sleds is on the decline, and 2 major manufacturers have gotten out of the snowmobile business entirely. Tyler Scott covered the story for Michigan Public.
The announcement from Arctic this December was we're going to stop manufacturing at our factories in Minnesota, and we don't know if we're going to be making snowmobiles anymore. A couple years ago, Yamaha also got out of the snowmobile business. So now we're down to 2 possibly snowmobile brands. That's such a shakeup in a niche sort of power sports market.
Fewer snowmobile manufacturers means fewer options for snowmobilers, and that has some riders worried about the future of the hobby.
Snowmobilers are worried about, well, this won't be great for me if there's fewer companies competing for my business, trying to make the best quality snowmobile and offer me options. 2 major players in the market is a different situation than having 4.
Snowmobile sales were at their height in the 1990s, when manufacturers sold 250,000 sleds each year.
Then there was the Great Recession, right? And it never really got back up to those same levels.
Sales saw a bump during the COVID-19 pandemic when people were looking for ways to get outside, but they never returned to their former highs.
Global sales of snowmobiles have been pretty steady between 100 and 160,000 units sold globally per year.
According to Tyler, there are a few reasons why demand for snowmobiles is down. One of them is the cost of purchasing and maintaining a snowmobile.
Snowmobiles aren't cheap, nor are they immune to inflation. Gas, you gotta travel, lodging, are all obstacles to more people getting involved in enjoying the sport. The new snowmobile can cost $20,000 pretty easy. Even used snowmobiles, the costs are high. So it just didn't used to be as expensive, and it's maybe only accessible to a smaller section of the population in general.
Snowmobiling is highly regional, with most sales happening in the upper Midwestern United States and surrounding Canadian provinces.
There's places where you can snowmobile, and there's a lot more places where you can't. And even within that regionality, which is mostly the vast majority of snowmobiles are in the upper Midwest and in Canada as well. The rest of the world is marginal compared to what upper Midwest and Canada do in snowmobile sales.
But as snowfall becomes less predictable, fewer people may be willing to spend the money if they're not sure they'll get to ride.
There'd been a couple low snow years in the past 2 or 3 winters, which may contribute a little bit, at least to the snowmobilers' anxiety about the whole situation. You can't plan around the snow because you simply don't know whether it's going to be there or not. It makes it harder to know you'll have the opportunities to use a snowmobile, especially if you, like a lot of snowmobilers do, travel to go hit the trails.
All of these factors could be keeping more people from getting into snowmobiling, especially if they've never ridden before.
Getting a new generation of people to experience snowmobiling is a challenge for the manufacturers. A lot of snowmobilers do it because they grew up snowmobiling and because they've been doing it their whole lives. So unless you were raised on it, it's hard to see where you might get into the sport.
But despite the challenges, snowmobilers are still finding ways to get out and enjoy the ride.
It's really kind of unique to have that experience on the back of a snowmobile. If you're in the Great Lakes region and you're looking for something to do in the winter, there are places that rent snowmobiles, even for a couple hours at a time. And if you've never considered that, I don't know, maybe you should.
Thanks for watching. For more about any of the stories in this show, visit greatlakesnow.org. When you get there, you can follow us on social media or subscribe to our newsletter to get updates about our work. See you out on the lakes.
This program was brought to you by the Fred and Barbara Earp Family Foundation, the Charles Stewart Mott Foundation, Richard C. Devereaux Foundation for Energy and Environmental Programs at Detroit PBS, Polk Family Fund, DTE Foundation, and contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.